Hi, this is Lindsay, and you are listening to the Contents of Characters podcast. In this podcast, I talk about content of pop culture. I talk about the characters in this fictional golden age of television, and I talk about the content of one's character, meaning we try to dig beyond just the person that, or the character or the actor, and sort of the fame of it all, and we try to look at what good deeds they're doing, or what causes they care about and they put their energy, efforts, and money into. This week's podcast could be pretty heavy. There's some personal talk of my suicidal experience, my reaction to the video or to the episode, and then some breakdowns of different little things that happen throughout the show. I'm probably not going to have enough time to get to everything, and we probably won't necessarily cover everything I even want to. So I'm considering doing another podcast. I don't know. We'll figure it out. For the contents of character section this week, it will be a little bit different. So I'm just going to read this tweet to you that I posted a couple days ago. Due to the content of 305, I will not feature any specific person for this week's podcast. The contents of characters section is dedicated to survivors and fighters, to everyone with a mental illness, and to those who love them. There is nothing about depression that is easy, and there is nothing about suicidal ideation that is easy. Asking for help, getting better, and I cannot speak to actual suicide attempts because I haven't lived that, so I cannot speak to it. All I can say is I got very, very close. And so if you are struggling, I've seen so many people just reach out and say, message me, it's fine. And a lot of those people even are not, just a regular old Twitter user with like 100 followers, like, me. But, there are people that are running, articles, and they're like, just message me. There are strangers and people with lots and lots of followers offering to be there for people. So please know that you're never alone. I don't think that suicide is necessarily the direct result of being alone. I think this show kind of nailed it. It's about hopelessness and feeling like you're out of options. And though when your brain is in that state, it's so hard to get to the part where you know that you have options. But there is an internet out there, and there are many private holes in this internet, and please reach out. And so, reach out. I certainly can't say I'm online all the time, but send me a message. Send anyone you think is cool a message if you're struggling, please, because I'm not the person that's going to tell you not to do it, but I am the person that's going to tell you that you're loved, and I'm going to tell you all the great things that I hear you say, and, I'm going to Naomi Bunch the fuck out of it. I won't drug you, but I am, because you're worth it, and I know that because you're here, and you matter. Every one of you matters, and you've made mistakes and you've fucked up, but you matter, and you've done good too, and you can continue to do good. And I know you're tired. If you're in that headspace, I know it, but it's going to be okay, because it's always okay and it's always not okay. And there are so many of us that have been in your shoes in that exact moment, and we want to get you through to the other side. So you have a network of people who know that feeling and want to be there for you. And so I saw so many people doing that, and it just really warmed my heart. I saw some people just reaching out and saying things like, I've tried this and I've tried this, and hopefully, and then other people would offer options that maybe they'd never heard of. And if you follow me on Twitter, you do know that I'm new to it and it's not something I do all the time. But to me, my experience through tweeting with Crazy Ex-Girlfriend is that Twitter is this lovely, fluffy, fairy princess place that is just full of gushiness. So Jack Dolgen wrote this episode, and he struggled a long time with suicidal ideation. He also tweeted to fans that had tweeted him and let them know, just, you can message me if you're going through this. And I don't know what else to tell you other than that is the power of people, and that is the power of connection. And the fact that a TV show it's not so much just ignite those feelings in us and have that connection with we're just watching that piece of art, but having the desire to reach out to other people who've had that experience and wanting to be there for them. That is what community feels like. And I do feel like the Crazy Ex-Girlfriend fans, they're drawn because somebody's speaking for them in a way that they haven't been spoken for. And that goes across the board with Crazy Ex-Girlfriend. And, I'm not going to get too much into, I'm not going to go into that because I want to stay focused on suicidal thoughts and suicidal ideation and suicide itself, or suicide attempts. But it does speak volumes that we want to be connected. So it just hats off to Jack Dolgen. For writing this and for surviving and for fighting and for being vulnerable and probably putting out the best portrayal of what it's like to get to that point and the most nuanced portrayal that exists. For me, in this community, I've found a couple of friends that for some reason I feel like are going to be friends for a long time. And that's cool. That's really cool. Also, I guess I want to send out a caution to the community that's building and growing and having a super connected moment right now. And that goes to, that just because we have similar experiences doesn't mean we necessarily got there in the same way. And the gift of listening is a big deal. And I know that a lot of people find it very scary to talk about the way they feel, and a lot of people feel very scared to hear it. And I think it's just because they don't know what to do. And so, if somebody tells you they're feeling this way, you listen. You listen to them. And it's not about, you don't want to try to convince them not to do it. You want to convince them that you love them and that you want to hear them and that you understand they're in pain. I mean, the empathy part that's what you need to do. You need to relate as much as you can, and also at the same time not try to say things like, I know how you feel, or I know exactly how you feel, because in that moment you don't ever feel that somebody can understand you. But you can identify with particular emotions, or a particular moment in your life, and let them know, I've been desperate, I've felt hopeless, and I understand how hopelessness affects me. So I didn't know that that's really what I was going to do there, but I guess, just being there and listening and empathizing is what you can do. And so don't be scared if you are a person who doesn't know what to do in that situation. That's really it. And it might sound silly, but it gets you through. And and then you offer whatever resources you can find, or you send them to somebody else that you think is better, and they have to take it from there. As Heather said, you can't help someone that doesn't want to help themselves, but swinging a flashlight around is fun. So do what you can. I don't know. I don't really know. I thought I would be more together for this podcast. I feel kind of prepared, maybe even over-prepared, but it's not really coming out that way. So I made a short recording of sort of like you do the reaction videos for everything on YouTube. I made a reaction audio file approximately an hour after I first watched 305, and so you can listen to that now. So I just finished watching the episode. I don't know the title right this moment. My brain's not there. I just finished like an hour ago. I guess I'm just recording this mainly to let myself say a few things real quick before I get to the point where I share my thoughts on it in a more strategic way, I guess. I was crying so audibly loud that my mother at the other end of the house came in here to see if I was okay. Well, she didn't come in here, she called to me. And I just replied, it's just this show. But it's not just this show, it's the scariness of being in a place that you really can't articulate, and that you feel like no one else understands. It's the pain of knowing people who've tried to kill themselves and who have succeeded, or both. It's the complexity at which healing takes. Let me say that again. It's the complexity of the journey of healing. And the depression and the hopelessness. I used to think that it was so... I just tried to explain it's just about hopelessness, and so few people get it. And your ratings probably won't improve after this episode. But I just feel like my heart grew. I have so much affection for everyone that takes part in this show. And it just didn't know it could evolve more. I'm appreciative and I'm sad. So that was recorded immediately afterwards. Everything else is recorded 4 or 5 days out when I've had time to process and research and find buddies online to watch the show with me. So I also want to just kind of share with you a little bit of my story, because if my story is probably relatable to a good handful of people out there, so I want to include it on this podcast as well. I've experienced depression all of my life. In fact, during times where I'm not depressed, I feel very weird, and I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop. If you've experienced depression, then you'll probably understand, or maybe will understand someday, what I mean by this. But I was in my mid-20s before I ever understood what sadness felt like. It had always been so much deeper than sadness, but being able to have an emotion that wasn't on the far end of the spectrum was very difficult for me. And there are times where I still struggle with it. And there are times that I do a lot of things to avoid feeling those really intense emotions because they scare me now. Because I'm afraid that I'll go back to a time where suicide was a real and viable option. And hopelessness was like hanging out on my couch and just couch surfing and just stopping by whenever. So when I was 25 or 26, I was very sick physically. I was in an unhealthy relationship, and this darkness, this suicidal thoughts, they started to turn outwards. And I remember being a lot more comfortable with beating myself up than I was with being mean to someone else. But in this bad relationship, like, I remember that I literally wanted to hurt my partner badly. And that scared me. And so I went to the therapist I was seeing at the time, and I asked them to take me to the hospital so I could check myself in. And that therapist, God bless her, was such an amazing person. She drove me back to my house to drop off my car and get some clothes to sleep in. And I remember walking into the house and grabbing my stuff. And as I was walking out the door, I just told my partner, I'm going to go check myself into the hospital. And my therapist, who was not getting paid for this and was not on the clock, sat with me for 3 hours while we waited for me to be evaluated to be checked into the hospital. And I cannot speak to hospitalizations and what they can do for other people. But while I was there, I mean, I remember asking for an extension to stay because they wanted me to go, and I was like, I'm not ready. That world is going to tear me apart, and in here I'm safe and I'm getting better and I'm learning things. And it was very intense, and I was very driven in it. And I met friends that I still have to this day there. I was so sick that I mean, it literally, and not joking in any way, was a matter of life or death for me. And because I was put in such extreme circumstances, while I was in the hospital, I was able to see, like, I couldn't continue to live with suicidal thoughts. And I hope I'm not making this sound easy when I say this, but I was forced to choose life. And because I was forced to choose life, I could not be suicidal because I wouldn't take care of myself and I would die within a week. My mom and my partner and people in my family and friends that I met really made a difference in that. And that is not to say that like it cured my depression or I just all of a sudden started making healthy choices, because I still struggle with it today, but what I struggle with today is so different than what I was struggling with 10 years ago. I don't know how to explain it. I haven't had any ideation, well, not any, but hardly any since then. And when I have had it, it's been things that were very, very triggering for me, that would put me back there. And so I guess I'm saying there's hope, and I'm not going to romanticize it. It's hard and it's a long journey. And whatever your brain chemistry is and the experiences you've had in your life, like, they're there and they're going to be a part of you, and that's okay. I don't know. I love you. I love you all. I think that this world is complicated and messy and painful and hurtful, and it makes it hard to always be the best version of ourselves, but it doesn't make us any less important. So I'm going to get off of that horse because I don't know, it's making me tense up, and you're wonderful and special. Anyway, we'll move on. So, we're going to do a crazy count for this week, and I'll tell you, I thought that the number was going to be 0 because I just didn't remember the words being said. It's not. I gave us a crazy count of 3 with an additional other words at 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So I gave it a crazy count of 10, which is more than last time. Now there are a lot of really soft references that are in here, and honestly maybe even one that shouldn't be in here at all. So let's just go ahead and give it a 9 with the addition of depression frizz. I think the reason I wanted to include it is because when Naomi says it to Rebecca, it is a bit of a pejorative, the way she says it. So I feel like it's important to, a diagnosis is a diagnosis. It has a lot to do with medical billing. It has a lot to do with however the DSM-5 is set up. And it has a lot to do with whatever symptoms you're presenting at that particular moment. So diagnoses are not the end-all be-all. I have depression. I'm pretty comfortable with just saying that and sticking with that. But I don't want other people to tell me I'm depressed. That's hurtful. And honestly, if they're not in me if they're not inside of me, if they're not in my brain, they don't know. And if I'm not telling them directly, they don't really know. And then if it is said, it needs to be said in a super loving way, I think. So we're going to go straight into what the actual crazies were. And so technically, speaking. Two of the crazies come from episode 304, where Rebecca tells Paula, she says, if I'm crazy, then you made me crazier. And I do know that they kind of chose the people based on, how it narratively fit into this episode. But I think that was also a big, because of all the people who were standing in that room, I think that Rebecca's relationship with Paula is the strongest and has weathered some storms, and maybe Paula doesn't truly know her at her worst, but she does really get her on a level and has a certain willingness to be there. And I think sometimes we may romanticize what a great friendship looks like, or any relationship really. And I think Rebecca and Paula's relationship has been grounded in Josh, but has also just kind of started to evolve into something else. And I certainly think they still have a lot of healing to go. But this particular insult from Rebecca is putting blame on Paula, despite her enabling tendencies that might not necessarily be worthy. And I do know Paula did all the things behind her back that we found out in the Rose's Turn song. But, they engaged in that unhealthy behavior together. And so, I feel like they're equally responsible. And you'll probably hear that from me a lot. I feel like they're equally responsible if you're both doing stupid shit together and it's hurting your friendship and it's hurting you. But so Rebecca's seeing this, and she's really, I don't know what all she's taken in, but I think, on one part of it, it's a huge amount of guilt, and on the other part of it, it's looking at Paula, but you didn't say, you're not, you didn't convince me I wasn't crazy, because Paula made the attempt, but she didn't convince her. And not that Rebecca could have been convinced. And so then the next crazy kind of gives us this idea that Rebecca's starting to relinquish in this moment that she's crazy, because she's found the pills and she knows that her mother was manipulating her. So, she's got, I don't know, I feel like she feels like she has a bit of a worldview back intact at this moment. And that might sound like a positive thing, but her worldview is extremely negative and is not helping her out. So, when she's talking to the flight attendant, she says, everyone in LA thinks I'm crazy. And despite no one really saying this to her, the thought of going back to LA and facing what she's done, and also just facing what she feels like people think she's crazy. Her mom has her issues with her, so she feels like she doesn't belong anywhere, because it's not acceptable to be crazy. It's not acceptable to be sick. And then, so some of the softer ones, and I mean, if you're into this, you'll be like, yeah, I feel like maybe you're stretching a little bit here. But it goes into where Nathaniel it's in the flashback in 304, where Nathaniel tells her to calm down, and she says, don't tell me to calm down. And I think when she sees that, she's thinking very much about how someone was trying to help her in that moment. And she didn't want their help either. She didn't, and I know I've said this on here before, but telling somebody to calm down is just like asking them to be riled up. And then the next one is a little loose as well, but maybe even stronger so, because I think it ties back into a theme of a thread I think a thread is probably a better word, or a through line in this show, where Naomi says that she has to scoop up, somebody has to clean up the elephant poop, and then she says, "You're the one that's pooping, Rebecca. You're the elephant." Or probably Becky, because she calls her Becky, which I find endearing. And I think this kind of goes back into, we talk about when Greg leaves her, what does Greg say? Greg says, our stuff was a shit show. When Josh leaves her, what does she want to do? She wants to give him poop cakes. And she tried pretty hard, which is just like, can't get over it. But so this idea that, her mom can say this to her is a reinforcement that, yes, everybody knows my life is shit. And for me, like, that's a thought that runs through my head all the time, at many, many different stages of my life, being various different wonderfuls and messed up and craziness. And so I'm counting it, even though it's not particularly that, but it is, maybe it's because of the contents of this show that I want to include some of these other remarks on Rebecca's well-being. I think I touched on depression, Frizz, a little bit, so let's skip over that here. And so when Rebecca finds out that she's been being drugged by her mother, Naomi says, "I just wanted to get you to a place where I could convince you to go get help." And so she certainly says this, and I'm going to come back to this at a different part. So she certainly says this in is framed very well, I think. And then Rebecca lashes out, you want to commit me, you want to commit me. And I don't know, I mean, just having been, I don't know, committed or self-committed or whatever, I feel like that word is so fucking scary. And I feel like when we hear it, we think of prison and we think of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. And that's not, I don't know, that's just not, it's not a very inviting word that says anything about hope to me. But the way that Naomi had phrased it, I really felt like she did. And then, Naomi gets defensive in regards to this, and she says, that is such a dramatic word, which is a very, while I 100% agree with you on this, Naomi, is not what you say to somebody you want to get help. And emotions are high when it's mother-daughter stuff. Emotions are high when it's somebody you love, and you're going to say the wrong things. You just are, and everyone's different. And so what I'm telling you is right, might not be right, but it was just an insult to her reaction, which is built up because of Naomi's experience with her, and when she was in college, and the things that had happened to her. The next and the last word on our crazy count is when Daryl and Maya and Jim get into the pool with Cornelia and Nathaniel. And Daryl, in his infinite blindness, says, well, I think Cornelia or one of them asks why they're there, and Daryl says, well, Maya and Jim followed me like the psychos that they are. And I probably think this is the most important mention in the crazy count, because I think psychos is, I want to say younger, but a more immature word. And also one that's even more removed than crazy. And they used it in the last episode as well. Tommy said it. And so I think that this use of psychos is, one, obviously what Daryl did is the exact same thing that Maya and Jim did. But I think this is just a blatant, like, sort of calling out that office is mentally unstable. It is not a safe environment. And we see this very illustrated by Cornelia, which I'll get into in a minute. But I think that's it's a direct letting us know they're a problem too. So again, there was only 3 actual crazies this episode, and they were all in Rebecca's head, and I think that's kind of important. Anyhow, if you think there's something that I missed, or if you want to dispute why one of these should be on the list, feel free. You know how to get a hold of me. So when we were first introduced to Cornelia, in the promo last week, I remember tweeting that Cornelia was just like Rebecca, but plus size, which, I don't know, I thought that was cool. I feel like when shows do that sort of thing, they tend to bring in, like, someone who looks like them but is hot, and I'm not saying that Cornelia is not hot, but, like, overly sexualized. And so I thought they did a great job of flipping the script on this one. So there's a couple things that I think are relevant to who Cornelia is. I feel like her being there helps illustrate the unbalance and the unprofessionalism and the toxic environment that is now Plimpton, or White Feather and White Feather. I don't remember what it was called. But I think, just her steadfastness in being professional and working a certain way gives us that feeling. But also because she is clearly there. She's clearly meant to be there to represent a different version of Rebecca. Maybe what Rebecca could be, or maybe what Rebecca was. But there are a couple of things that she does that I think are worth mentioning, and I guess the main thing is she pronates. So this is a big deal because it's mentioned a whole bunch of times, and it's not just a joke. It's not just a throwaway joke. There are no throwaway jokes. This is Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, and I'll tell you, if I looked up everything they ever said, we would never get off of this podcast, ever. But so, didn't know what pronate means, so I had to look it up, and it means that, you do want to pronate, but it means that you walk in on the inside of your feet. And so, this is a little bit of an aside and not really relevant, but I think that Rebecca Bunch might pronate. Rachel Bloom might actually pronate a little bit, based on my extremely non-qualified, very limited, I read a definition on the internet assessment. But anyway, and back to the relevance of this, is that she tends to go on the inside. And what the real Rebecca is doing while Cornelia is focusing on her walking and putting a lot of effort into walking straight and being able to maintain balance and take care of herself, take care of her body, and not cause additional problems. Just a little more of an aside, but if you're having problems with your feet and you start walking incorrectly, you cause problems in other parts of your body, and before you know it, you're all out of whack. You probably all knew that, and you probably all know how to walk properly, but in case you didn't. So, while Cornelia is heel-toeing it, Rebecca is literally collapsing in on herself and staying in her head and searching the web privately and not talking to anyone. She's isolating, and so she's completely collapsing in on herself. And so I take this even a step further, which now you might be thinking, you are crazy, girl, we got to get off of here. And that's fine. You can do that, because I'm just talking about crazy. That's all I'm doing. So I think it tells us that while this lawyer has her shit together, this lawyer also has found out that she self-destructs. I don't think it's just about her feet. I think it's about her foundation being rocked and falling in on itself. And I think that Cornelia is quick to recognize these behaviors not as being odd, and who would do that, as much as this is just going to get me in trouble. And so I think Cornelia plays such a big role here. And when she gets into singing the song, the song This Isn't About Me, I also think that that's a very important measure to this episode. I've heard criticisms that are not happy that the show was going to the office and going to the beach and playing the fairy game, and no way. It was so important, and I felt that sort of disconnect, because I love Rebecca and I want to be with Rebecca, and I would rather be with Rebecca than all of these people who are grieving her. I want to just be there and let her know that she's okay. Very much like I feel towards all of the fans of the show. I mean, really everyone, but I had such an outpouring, and so for real, if you are listening to this podcast and you are ever having suicidal thoughts or consideration or just really dark thoughts and you want to get rid of them, call me. I can't work magic, but I can be there and I can listen. I'll probably say that other places if I haven't already in this podcast. And so when she's singing this song isn't about me, I mean, she's literally telling the audience, as well as the Plimpton employees, like, this isn't about me. It's about your relationship with this person. I understand that they've kind of feel like they can't reach out to her right now. But I think that almost in a way it's saying, you're putting a lot of energy into something that you shouldn't be putting energy into right now. All these feels that you're feeling, they would benefit from calls and texts to Rebecca or to Naomi or, what have you. And so I think we're seeing like the tip of what it would look like if Paula were to lose Rebecca permanently, or Nathaniel, or Jim, or Maya, even though, especially, the minor characters, especially the minor characters, they are, it shows us how much of a presence Rebecca has and how much people look up to her and need her, even if they are not the closest of relationships. Rebecca fills a role for all of the people in the office. She plays a part, and I'm going to even stretch this so far as to go with Mrs. Hernandez. And I do know it's been said by Rachel, I believe, Rachel or Elaine, one, that Mrs. Hernandez is going to be a real bitch this season. And I think that Mrs. Hernandez probably has a good grip on what's okay and what's not okay. And she might get sucked into it and she becomes resentful and a little bitchy. And so when all you see her do this episode is cut people off and just be like, not acceptable, not acceptable, not acceptable. And if that's what makes her a bitch for being like the only voice of reason in the office, well, then so be it. Because the point is, it's not about you and what you're losing right now. It's about how you can realize that this loss or this absence of Rebecca is a cry for help. And that might be a lot to put on people, and that is certainly not. If you've been in that situation and you weren't able to see it and you missed it, please know that that is not a call out, because we carry way too much guilt. If someone does take their life, it's terribly painful, and we harbor that. But I think there's always still the question of how do we improve and how do we recognize these things, and also be respectful of their space. And it's a very difficult line to walk. And I'm not saying that anyone in the office knew or could have prevented her from attempting suicide. But I think she needed a little TLC from West Covina. And so I want to talk about Daryl a little bit. He says he read this book and he learned that he has a pathological need for approval that prevents him from engaging in conflict. I think that we see that play out in every single character. It's true in Josh. It's true in Valencia. It's true, maybe not in Heather. It's true of Rebecca. And so maybe they're not as consumed as Daryl is, because he needs to be approved. He's looking for approval from everyone. Whereas other characters might be looking for approval from one person, or that one person specifically holds a lot of weight in their life. But this is a crux of conflict, and maybe this is part of the reason that they, have a shitty intervention, and why they're not able to address her specifically when it comes to, her abandoning them, much like Josh did her at the altar, and the litany of other guys that have hurt her, including her dad. So I think that that's just really a nice nugget that the show threw in to let us know that we're getting a lot closer to medical speak. And so if you don't know, they are going to diagnose or give Rebecca a diagnosis in this next episode. And I've heard that she's she's going to have to wrestle with that for a while, because these things are very difficult to put into context of your identity. It takes a long time to form your identity, and she's very mired in this word crazy, and not any true notions of what her diagnosis may be. And one benefit of having a diagnosis is that it opens up treatment options for you. And so it's pretty relevant that she does get a diagnosis. And I have a lot of anxiety around that, because a diagnosis will shift the show in a way that we haven't seen yet, particularly because of the weight of this last episode. I don't think that she's going to just be diagnosed with depression. I think, and I say that like, oh, just depression. It rules my life. It's a big factor in my world. So I'm not negating that. But depression is an easier label to say than a lot of other mental illnesses. So it's going to be fascinating what they do and how they shape it. And I'm 100% confident that they do know what to do. But at the same time, because they got a diagnosis for Rebecca based on the way that she's been, and it should be true to what we've seen of her, it's going to be quite interesting to see how they fit that into the DSM-5 and how that affects how she sees herself and how others see her. So it doesn't look like we're going to have time to cover everything I wanted to cover in this episode. And honestly, what I have left to share for the most part is pretty hefty stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and do two parts. The next part, I can't promise when it will be released. Maybe during Christmas time when we have a break or something like that. Anyway, I will keep you updated on it. I do want to touch on just a couple of other things as quickly as I possibly can and get us out of here in under an hour. I talked to a lot of people who are super moved by this episode, but also just kind of didn't see this coming. And I read a tweet by Rachel that said that she tried to warn people through the title of the show, which is I Never Want to See Josh Again. Also, nobody refers to that. We all refer to it as 305 for the most part, because it just makes more sense for it to be 305. It's part of just making it palatable. And she also said that, they sent out tweets and stuff, sort of like trigger warnings the best that they could. But so I started kind of just looking back a little bit, and there's been, in the last podcast I talked about Lourdes bringing up the death drop and then the correlation of Bex and Josh being at that brown pit. So that's obviously a big, kind of reference to where she's going, or some foreshadowing for where she's going. But also, if you remember back in my first podcast, which I've got to get back up, I don't know why it's not up with the rest of them, I talked a lot about how I thought the song Where's Rebecca Bunch was going to set the tone for this season. And so we've seen Rebecca disappear twice this season, in the first episode and actually 3 times, in the 4th episode and in the 5th episode. Or maybe the 4th and 5th is combined. But in the song, there's several things that happen. One is that George says, if I were her, I would kill myself. He just says it like right out there. Just says it. So we should hear it. And when Rebecca's in the bed and she's talking about Josh, and we believe she's talking about Josh, and she gets to the part where, I don't remember the exact line, but it's like, or should I fight back? Could I let him win, or should I fight back? Fight back, fight back. And I feel like we're just now getting to the point where she started to fight. I don't feel like any of this revenge or other stuff had anything to do with even that song. I feel like now she's going to start to fight, because she's going to have to figure out and start trying to fight to accept herself, and start trying to fight to make those healthy choices and not rely on butter ads. She's got a lot of work to do. There's so many more little specks of things peppered out to let us know that this is happening. And I know it goes all the way back to episode 1, but I kind of want to stick to season 3 when I'm talking about this. So even when Audra Levine walks into Naomi's house, she looks at Rebecca and says, "You must want to just die." And Rebecca says, "No, I don't. We're getting along." And Audra says, "How did you earn her acceptance?" Which I think is kind of what tips Rebecca off, that she didn't do anything to earn her acceptance. And then we move on, and Audra says, "You're a smart girl." That doesn't make any sense. And so we still have, what I think is interesting about this is Audra is paralleling what Audra says parallels sort of what Naomi says, but there's no additional flattery or fluff to go along with it. And so Rebecca's like, yes, I'm smart. I should do better than this. Plus, she's got these anxiety pills calming down her brain and letting her work where she will. And then Naomi comes in and sees Audra, and she says, so will you be staying around for ice cream and board games? And Audra says, I'm not sticking around for the murder Suey. And I didn't catch it the first time, but, you know, she literally just says, I'm not going to stick around for the murder-suicide that's going to happen. So they're really doing a lot of different things to prep us. Of course, in this episode, we do know it. We feel it coming once you're in it, or I did. But they're doing a lot to kind of take care of us. Oh, my goodness. There's really so much more I want to talk about, but I do want to find a way to in this podcast. So I guess I will tell you some of the things that I want to talk about in the next podcast. I want to talk about board games and ice cream. This is the thing. I want to talk about the grief a little bit more, the friendships, particularly with Paula. I want to talk about Naomi and some of the things she says to Rebecca towards the end. And then I want to spend the rest of that time, if there is any time, this is just such a heavy episode, talking about some suicides in movies kind of throughout the years or portrayals of it, and as well as maybe a few brief touches on mental illness and what's kind of going on in the golden age of television, as well as a little nugget about... I'll go ahead and do this one briefly, and we'll get more in depth with it next time. But another one of the things that, you know, the writing was on the wall and they let us know is in 304, Paula comes in and sees Nathaniel holding Rebecca, and he says to her, oh, I see you're doing an officer and a gentleman sort of thing, but now is not the time. So I'd never seen An Officer and a Gentleman. I decided to watch it. This show starts out with this little boy coming to live with his dad, who is a sailor. And we find out a little later on that it's because his mother had committed suicide. And she committed suicide by taking a lot of pills. So I feel like that's another reference that kind of let us go into it. But I have done a little bit of analysis on that movie compared to some little compare and contrast going on, and that will have to wait until the next episode. There's also a couple of brilliant quotes from some other movies that I want to share with you. So this is the end of part 1 of 305, and I hope that you enjoyed it. All I can say is I didn't have a year and a half to prepare like the writers did for this episode. I hope that it brought you some comfort or some help, or you enjoyed some insights, or it got your wheels turning and you want to share some of that with me. You can find me on Twitter. My name is Girly Kick, Girl. How do you spell it? Shit. Girly. Girlieikick. And then I guess the additional name you can put on it is Contents of Characters. You can also email me at contentsofcharacters, plural, not possessive, S's on both words, at gmail.com. You can find me on Facebook, again, Contents of Characters. I'm also on YouTube, again, it's Contents of Characters. You know, feel free to give me any feedback, ask any questions, tell me something else that you want to talk about. I'm open, and I just kind of enjoy talking about this and learning and researching it, and it's just fun for me. So I hope that it's fun for you, and I will talk to you next week. Stay safe and stay connected.